All right, so we are back at Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Stephen Christoforou, who is the Executive Director of Focus North America and the former Director of the Youth and Young Adult Ministries of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. We're going to be talking about Orthodoxy in America. We're going to be talking about the recent uptick of converts. Very excited to have you on, Stephen. Thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, as I was telling you before, I've been following your work for a while now, because you've had a very active online ministry, really had a presence, as I said before, with young adults with the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in the U.S. But for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background. What's your story? How did you end up doing the work that you're doing today?
Yeah. In brief, born and raised in New York to Greek immigrant parents, cradle Orthodox, like raised in the church, very active on Sundays, right? Like participating in programs and so forth. Not particularly religiously formed at home, no sort of like shared prayer life or anything, but very active at least on Sundays. Went through that kind of normal period of late teenage years, kind of like having doubts in high school and falling away during college and really then having a religious experience after my dad passed away in college, which kind of recalibrated a lot of things in my brain and ended up years after that going to seminary and kind of providentially just started working for the youth and young adult ministries of the Greek Archdiocese. Did that for a decade and then left and didn't know where I was going. Spent a month at a monastery trying to figure out what God might have for me, and that led me to the Fellowship of Orthodox Christians United to Serve, and I've been here for the last like 3-ish years now.
And tell us more about what Focus's ministry is. Like, what do you guys actually do?
Yeah, so Focus brings Orthodox Christians together to serve the poor. We run a variety of ministries, we call them Focus Centers, local operating divisions across the country, 13 right now. We're on pace to have 17 up and running by the end of the year. It's a variety of things from homeless shelters to feeding programs to support for expectant mothers and families, right? The point is to unite Orthodox Christians to reveal Christ's love through service that restores dignity, transforms lives, and builds community, right? And I kind of see a really nice connection between the work that I was doing earlier, sort of preaching on the internet, although I eventually kind of had second thoughts about the whole sort of like culture of, online orthodoxy.
Mhm. Yeah.
But this is very much like practicing what we preach, right? Not just going out there and talking the talk, but trying to walk the walk and like sacramentally making the Lord's love visible in the liturgy after the liturgy, right? Because this is at the end of the day what the Lord tells us, right? Like Saint Maria, riffing on Matthew 25, Saint Maria of Paris, a 20th century saint, she's like, I'm not going to be judged by the number of prostrations that I did. I'm going to be judged by whether I fed the hungry and clothed the naked. So that's what we're trying to get folks together to do. And by God's grace, people are enthusiastic about it and people are coming together in new cities. And we're trying to do the Lord's work to the extent that we can.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to the issue of online internet Christianity in a moment. But no, I mean when you said that you grew up in a Greek family and you're brought to church, you go through, all the motions because that's part of our culture as Greeks. I mean, that's something that, as I was telling you before, like that's something that I really value that because again, like by just like by default, if you're Greek, like you go to the Orthodox church and you do all the things. But I also, there was a point where I realized like I need to know who God is. I need to
Yeah.
know like what does this all mean? And that was a very big struggle for me because most of the people at church were there because they were Greek, not so much because, and it's not to say they didn't believe, I can't
Yeah.
judge anyone's heart, but like clearly the uniting factor was ethnic, cultural, more so than a matter of spirituality and faith. Um, so no, it's interesting seeing other people who also kind of hit that wall and say, okay, well, what is this really about? Like, where is God really present in my life in the church?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it's like it's led you to doing the work that you're doing now. But that's the other thing that like a lot of people who were not raised in the Orthodox Church, who, were not culturally Orthodox, are now discovering Orthodoxy. There's this uptick in converts, which I mean is just hitting the media now. Like we're seeing all these articles, including in the New
Sure.
York Times, but this isn't exactly a new phenomenon. Like people have been converting for a while now. So, I mean, because I mean, since you're kind of have been involved in like online Orthodox circles, better or worse, for a while now. I don't know, like when did you first start to see this kind of wave of converts, and when did you see it like really start picking up to the point that, like mass media is covering it?
Yeah. I think you raise a good point that it's not like nobody was interested in the church or being received into the church, right? I think it was probably more of a trickle that in retrospect seemed, I think, more proportional to our formative ability as a church to handle. People were
Mm,
coming in, they were reading like Callistos Ware, or they were, wlistening to Father Tom Hopko on Ancient Faith Radio or something like that, right? And
mm,
things were sort of drawing them into the church, and they were kind of like these onesies, twosies kind of coming into a community to then sort of be formed. Now we're seeing the sort of like the floodgates are wide open, right? And I feel like this, it's not unique to say it, right? It's very sort of pandemic adjacent, right? There's something about, I think, what that did to our brains, what that did to us socially, like driving us online, making that the only place folks were getting any kind of human interaction, and then driving people as a result, to the church. So, it's something that's kind of a newish phenomenon, right? And I think that's what makes this kind of really interesting, I think, because so often in the Christian tradition, we sort of understand things in retrospect, right? Like
mm,
when Jesus tells his disciples, like, to open up the scripture, right? And he's looking back on the Old Testament, like it's him, but it doesn't make sense until him. So there's a part of me that wonders, like, we're not really going to understand what all this means for 100 years, right? I mean, we're going to have to
mm,
look back
yeah.
and see where all of this goes. So it's interesting. I have questions about it and sort of concerns about it, but if this really is something in retrospect that is the Holy Spirit kind of moving in the community, glory to God. If there are sort of weird cultural elements that we need to kind of work out, like let's talk about them. But TBD is kind of where a lot of this lands, I
Yeah.
think.
I mean, that's not really the internet is not really conducive to that kind of TBD mentality. I mean, you have to have a hot take right now and you need to
Yes.
capitalize on it. You can't really give space to see, okay, like where's the spirit moving here? But ultimately, I mean, that is how Christianity works. Yeah, time is going to tell.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I feel like that one of the first, like most prominent internet personalities I saw who converted to Orthodoxy was Rod Dreher. And
Mhm.
I remember I saw him speak once in Kansas at a Benedictine college a few years ago when the Benedict option came out. And I remember he was explaining that one of the motivating factors for him was his struggle with the abuse scandal in the Roman Catholic Church. And that is less of an issue in Orthodoxy. But, the more and more we see people converting, I mean, there are a plethora of reasons, there are a plethora of things kind of attracting people to Orthodoxy. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the factors that you see? What do you think that people are finding in Orthodoxy that they may not be finding in other Christian denominations or in the mainstream culture, in general?
Yeah. From my perspective as an Orthodox Christian, I think it's helpful to approach this with a little bit of humility first and foremost,
Mm,
right? Because it's not like Orthodox Christianity is the only tradition out there that is gaining, new eyeballs, right?
right.
Like, so it's not. I don't think it's something like to beat our chest about and think this is what proves that we are true because people are coming to us, right? They're coming to a lot of things as they struggle with these deep existential questions. I think there are, glory to God, there are people who are just genuinely out there seeking to know Jesus, seeking to love him, and then finding the scaffolding for that, right? Like in the historic church.
Yeah.
The way one of my professors once said this at seminary, right? If you think about like life is this wilderness and there's this path kind of going through the forest, like that's the church, right? Like that's just kind of like this sure path that's been trod by generations of feet, right? Prayer, fasting, almsgiving, like this is how you are formed in and make your way towards the Lord. I think there are people who are being driven by cultural factors, personal factors, personal insecurities, right? Like we live in this very atomistic and consumeristic age where we as individuals are kind of navigating all these deep questions of meaning and belonging and purpose. And they're finding in Orthodoxy as well as in other traditions, like traditions, right? A sense of belonging, a sense of, I don't need to figure this out from scratch. They're finding a level of certainty which I think is where things get particularly dangerous. They're finding like a level of certainty in this kind of historic witness in this age of doubt and flatness. Like I'm very into Charles Taylor and his
Yes.
secular 1, 2, 3 thesis, right? Like it's in this wave of, you know, uh, belief in the non-material is not something that we sort of like have in our bones anymore as a society. We just sort of like assume the flatness of the world, right? There is no heaven above, there is no hell below, and that's terrifying for people, right? That creates all these sort of like deep existential doubts and wonderings, and so they're kind of latching on, I think, to the church as this way to handle some of that, just the existential terror of looking up into the night sky and thinking like we are so tiny in this like vast universe, right? I long for a cosmos. I long for order. So, for what it's worth, right? I think that those are kind of the questions, the existential questions and the insecurities and the loneliness that's driving people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about like the certainty thing because at least in, this like famous New York Times article about all these converts, the author is emphasizing how much for some people who are converting, there's this attraction to like, this kind of like rigorous, masculine, demanding doctrines
Yeah,
which you could find in any religion if you want to look at them, if you want to approach them that way in a
totally.
legalistic sense, which, I mean, in their essence, that's not what the doctrines are about. But I also understand why, like, if you grew up in a very kind of relativistic culture, like, yeah, I understand why you want to swing the pendulum the other way, even if that's not, the totality of it. But I think more importantly, what you're saying about Taylor and the kind of the problem of disenchantment, the sense that life is flat, there's nothing more, like what you see is what you get, and that's it. I mean, that's
Yeah,
if you really the more you get immersed in that kind of cultural, that social imaginary, as Taylor would say, like it's a very suffocating one because as soon as you realize like you innately have this desire for more, um, what are you to do? Where do you turn
yeah,
if you don't have that outlet? And like, I have to say for me, I mean, one of the things that I struggled with, like when I entered fully into the Catholic Church, was I don't know, like the Western liturgy is just because of the nature of Western theology, it's very flat. Like it is very
yeah,
legalistic. It's very, we follow the rubrics and that's it. And like, I don't know, like it's bigger than, Catholic versus Orthodox because, the Orthodox Church has a Western rite, the Catholic Church
sure.
has Byzantine, Eastern rite. But still, I mean, I have to say I feel very different when I go to a Greek Orthodox parish for the liturgy because there's a sense of mystery that I don't find when I go to the like Latin rite in the Catholic Church. Even
Mm,
sometimes like I'll go to the Byzantine rite churches and Catholic churches and it's I don't know. Maybe it's because of the cultural attachment for me because it's Greek, but nevertheless, like the Divine Liturgy in itself, like there's something I think for Westerners, for Americans that is extremely enchanted that again, I don't feel as much in certain Western liturgies. So
yeah.
I completely understand why people feel like, again, after feeling suffocated by that flatness, it's like, whoa, like the cosmos opens up when you're in the divine liturgy.
Yeah. And I think the challenge for us is kind of like, what do you do with that and where do you go from there? Right. Like,
Yeah.
I think one of our challenges, I think, as postmodern people who are struggling with this sense of disenchantment is like, we're looking for signs and wonders, right? We're looking
Yes.
for angels and demons, and we're looking for this almost like quasi fantasy elements, right? Like we want like fairies and orcs and like stuff like that to be real.
Mhm.
And I think kind of where I land about a lot of this stuff is I think if we actually are doing re-enchantment right, like we're simply seeing Christ in the face of everybody we encounter, right? Like
Yeah.
if we can't see Christ in the face of the poor, I don't care what sort of like abstract theology or talk angels and demons and whatever sort of apocryphal stuff that you're talking about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of this like this interest, I think that like it's the rubber where the rubber meets the road, right? Like practically, does this turn
Mm.
into like love of God in neighbor, or does it turn into this kind of continued solipsism?
So, I mean, but this is a personal question that I've had. Because like what you're saying about focus and this, the fact that you guys are actively ministering to, serving the poor, going out there, being missionary. I had a very hard time finding that within Orthodoxy. And it might be again
Totally.
because I was in like, Greek very ethnic Orthodox circles, but like I think part of what attracted me to Catholicism is that that is a very, very much a key part of the Catholic Church throughout history, the missionary orders.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like a lot of perhaps the reason we don't see that as much in Orthodoxy is that there is such a strong emphasis on mysticism, on contemplation. Like when you look at Orthodox monastics, like they live a purely contemplative life. Like
Yeah.
there's much less emphasis on active ministry or active missionary kind of efforts, which I think is a strength of Orthodoxy. But then again, like there is this need to go out and minister to the poor, to recognize Christ in, the least of these. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, now that you're actively doing this kind of work and you're trying to encourage other Orthodox to do that, I mean, I don't know, like, how do you face that kind of struggle within Orthodoxy, like that strong emphasis on mysticism, but trying to bring it out there into active, concrete acts of service?
Yeah. I mean, I'll rewind a little bit and say I share those struggles. I mean, there was a time when I was in college, for example, when I seriously thought about being received into the Catholic communion as well. Like, I was in a debate society when I was in undergrad, and I was surrounded by these really just brilliant people who spoke so eloquently about, we'd have these long debates about Aquinas and, Augustine and all that sort of stuff. And I
Mm,
was really impressed by the systematic rigor of it, and also I think really impressed by the cultural relevance of it, for lack
yeah.
of a better word, right? Like, I was having these really interesting theological debates, and I knew what Catholic charities were. Like, Catholics had a reputation in my community for being the sort of people who did that. And as I kind of like found my footing again and had what I would call like experiences, I hope, of the divine, I kind of realized in retrospect a lot of my sense of the church is grounded like in my grandmother's table and in the monasteries that I visited, like places where sacramental living just imbued everything. Like everything was prayer, everything was communion with the divine, like in the people that you served and in the people that you loved, right? Like that, going to Athos a dozen times, and even before I came to Focus, right, doing kind of this month-long sabbatical. Like that's the vision of the church that always inspired me.
Mm,
And I really had to kind of like learn to live in that tension of the church that I saw in parishes, the church that I saw in the parish, like wasn't that. And so some of it is like trying to help people like actually follow through on the beauty that I think was there, right? And it's a beauty I think in the Orthodox tradition in particular that was lost because we didn't come to this country as missionaries. Like we came because we wanted to work in the mines and work in the
yeah.
restaurants and save up some money and then go back, right? Like the church was a
Yeah.
diaspora for the longest time. And it wasn't until the Orthodox bishops got together in 94 or whatever it was at Ligonier and were like, no, actually, we're not a diaspora church. Like we're here. And now we have to sort of like adjust our
Yeah.
approach. Like it took us a long time to figure that out.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's the other piece of it that like the kind of cultural thing for me that at least in New Jersey, which is a whole other world from, Astoria,
Yeah.
Greeks. Um, like the main priority for a lot of the Greeks there was like the American dream. Like you got to make it. You
Yeah.
start out in the kind of urban ethnic ghetto, and eventually you make your money, you move out to the suburbs, and then the goal is for the church that you raise enough funds so that you can build a giant church out in the suburbs. You leave the one in the ghetto.
Yes.
And I struggled with that because I was like, okay, I understand that. I don't know, because like just to be like transparent, my family, my Greek side immigrated to Newark, New Jersey, and there were two Greek Orthodox parishes there,
Mm.
and both of them eventually like uprooted into the suburbs, built these giant, beautiful churches. But my question was like, okay, so what happens to the parish in Newark? Like what
Yeah.
happens to like again like this kind of missionary dimension of the faith? Like how do you witness to the faith to the neighbors in the neighborhood? And I understand that like I don't know like the priest got jumped several times in the parking lot. Like it was dangerous. So I completely
Yeah.
understand. And like you don't want your car to get, stolen while you're at church. Like again, I understand it and I can't like cast judgment, but I was a little sad because I was like, so now everybody's comfortable in this big, beautiful church in the suburbs, and we don't have to worry about our cars. We don't have to worry about the priest getting jumped. But like, how are we living Christianity as a missionary? Like, where's the missionary dimension of this? Like, how are we serving the poor?
Yeah,
And not just serving the poor in terms of like giving them food, but like, how do we become a sign to them that like Christ is present even in the ghetto, like even in this dangerous area?
totally.
Um, so again, it's not to cast judgment, but it's like I wanted more. Like I wanted to see that like we believe in Christ so much that we're willing to take the risk of sharing him in a very dangerous neighborhood. But instead, the American dream and having this nice, comfortable suburban life takes priority. And like again, back to Taylor, for me personally, like that's like growing up in that kind of environment was where I was like, okay, if this is all life is, this is not very exciting. Like if it's just
Totally.
like you make enough money to have your nice, comfortable life, I want more than this. And every time I try to ask about that in church, it's like, ah, don't worry, just keep going to church. So I mean, it's this is why I like hearing what you're doing. Like it gives me a lot of hope because I think that yeah, like Orthodoxy can offer this, can, be in service to the poor, and like there need to be spaces where this is happening, where people are being kind of woken up.
Yeah. And I think there needs to be a level of repentance that we have to, accept as Orthodox Christians, right? Like actually changing our mindset and changing the way that we interact with the world. And I think a lot of that repentance even comes down to changing the way that we even talk about identity in the church, right? Because
Yeah.
I had a very similar kind of experience, not just where I grew up, but also doing a lot of travel when I, over the last, 15 years or whatever in ministry. We have a lot of, for lack of a better word, commuter parishes where so you're in church on a Sunday morning and we think about like who we are. We are people who are driving here 30, 45 minutes, whatever it is. And
Yeah.
the people who live across the street are not us, right? Like there's this very sort of weird like
Yes.
us versus them kind of mentality, which leads, I think, maybe even to the manifestations of that violence, right? Like I also know other Orthodox churches in what you would call rough neighborhoods that are beloved because the person who lives right across the street, like this is our community and this is where we are planted and like the door is open and we're going to do more kind of like
Yeah.
community meals and so forth, right? And like when we kind of like calibrate at the very beginning who we are and who this community is, right? It changes things. I mean, that's how Paul always starts his epistles, right? Like he's always reminding the Christians in Corinth or Ephesus or whatever, like, remember who you are. And then like, if like your ontology is sort of set, right, your ethics will kind of flow
Mm,
from that. And
yeah.
I think we have this broken ontology as Orthodox Christians, like I'm Greek, I'm Russian, I'm this and that. And so we have this beautiful communal connectivity to those that we're related by blood to, right? But we have this like the people who live literally right across the street that we parade around on Good Friday every year, like they're outsiders. And, they hear our bells going every Good Friday and they look at us weird with our candles and we never make any attempt to approach them. And that has consequences for us and for them.
Yeah, and I mean, so but this is where I am like I'm of two minds because as much as I want more than just like, oh, could we go because we're Greeks and we only talk to the other Greeks and I remember like when a non-Greek, someone who was clearly non-Greek came in and everyone would just stare at them and like some people I remember there was one person who there's like a priest like had to make some kind of like announcement about it. Like apparently a parishioner told someone who again phenotypically was not Greek that they
Yeah.
were not allowed to receive communion because it's only for Greeks. And
Mm,
he was, super scandalized and thank God he said something. But Greeks can be that way. I'm sure Russians and other ethnic Orthodox can too. But as much as I think that's problematic and it really, collapses the fullness of the faith, the other side of me, like again, seeing so many converts, is a part of me that wonders, like, again, I'm being hyperbolic. I don't mean it seriously, but like,
yeah.
can you really understand the faith if you weren't raised in an Orthodox culture? Like, do you really get the nuances of it if you weren't breathing it in from a young age? Again, on this being immersed in the cultural reality of it. And of course, again, it's like that's between you and God. Like if God calls you to enter into the Orthodox Church, great, I'm happy for you. But there will always be a part of me that will feel like you don't fully get it. Like when
Yeah.
you, it's like. you're imitating all the actions, but you don't feel it in your bones the way someone who is cradle Orthodox would, who was raised in the culture. And again, I don't mean that seriously, but I'm saying like I feel
Sure,
that way. I can't help but
sure,
feel like you don't. And it's because the ethnic dimension is so big. And it's not just, again, like I wrote this in the first things article. It's that, but it's also, I think, because unlike Catholicism, unlike the Western Church, Orthodoxy is such a mystical, like such an emphasis on the mystical. It's not like, oh, I read the catechism. Now I know the rules. Now
yeah,
I
yeah.
follow. Like, no, it's like it's something you can't explain fully. It's the, that kind of like the apophatic nature of the theology. It's like, yeah, you can do all the things, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get it, you
Yes.
know?
It needs to be
So
experienced. It needs to be sat in, right?
yeah.
The way that I try to parse this is Saint Silouan the Athonite, in some of his notes, right, which are in his big life and notes. He talks about dogmatic consciousness and how
Mhm.
long it takes to develop. So, he had a couple of experiences in his life. Like he saw Christ like coming out of this icon, right? And then it took him 15 years to really sort of assimilate, as he says, that
Mhm.
experience of grace, right? It's
Yeah.
like you are touched by the divine, and then it's got to sit in you. He even talks about the time that it took Saint Paul to sort of develop his dogmatic consciousness. It's not like he had the road to Damascus moment and then started preaching and teaching, right? Like there's this tradition that he spent 15 years or whatever in the Arabian wilderness before he then went out and began preaching and teaching, because like the Spirit's got to do its work on you. And I think we have impatience sometimes, right? Because we read a
Yeah.
thing or see a video and we think we get it, as opposed to, it might be up here, right? But the mind hasn't fully descended into the heart, right? It's not the Holy Spirit praying in you. It's still you doing your ideas, your whatever. And I think we see that culturally at work too, like these traditional Orthodox countries where Christianity is just sort of like so deeply in the bones. Like there's a chapel every couple of blocks, right? Like
Mm.
it's in the air in a way that it's not, right? Like corporatism and capitalism and economics are sort of in the air of American culture,
Yeah.
which is a very different thing, right? That's individualistic, that's atomistic, that's sort of, that creates a lot of this loneliness. So there is something to be said about that culture. But there's an active tension, right? And I think sometimes we instead of the church baptizing the culture, the ethnic culture sort of like takes over, which is sort of the challenge.
Mm.
And there's no easy
But
answer to
yeah.
that too.
But that's the thing though. Like I don't like when it's like, okay, the church exists for Greek people to come together and have community. Like clearly that's not
Totally.
the answer. But I also don't think the opposite extreme of like, okay, we're gonna have a church for the real believers, the converts who chose this and who, like I feel like the ideal would be where everybody comes together and learns from each other. Like the cradle Orthodox are kind of provoked to really look deeper into the faith by the converts. And the converts, like you're saying, like learn to kind of assimilate it over time and not just rely on, I watched a TikTok reel or I read a book about Orthodoxy. But that's much easier said than done. Like I've seen
Yeah.
it going to Greek parishes where like you have the converts who do feel very much like outsiders and everyone stares at them because they're very pious and they do all the things much more intensely. And it's like hard to navigate, but like my hope is that I don't know, like my hope is that all the converts don't just flock to one parish and the Greeks and the Russians stay separate.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if it's possible, but like I think it's something to aspire to. It's an ideal that.
Yeah. And I think that is, I mean, that's St. Paul at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? Like there's neither Jew nor Greek. I think he would probably say, if he was writing today, forgive me if I'm putting words in his mouth, like there is neither cradle nor convert, right? Like we are all like in the body of Christ. I remember at seminary, a good buddy of mine who's a presbyter now, the language issue is one of those things, like that's kind of a
Yeah.
historical sort of challenge. And he said this thing one time. He's like, the language issue will only be addressed when those who speak English are willing to have the services done in Greek or whatever it is for those who don't, and those who speak
Yeah.
only Greek are willing to have it done in English for those who don't speak Greek. And it's this kind of mutual self-sacrifice, which is because I think
Yeah.
right now we have this thing where some people are kind of recent converts coming in and thinking like, I know better. right? I am more faithful. I am this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the more, kind of legacy Christians are like, you guys don't know anything, right? And it's this kind of like us setting us apart from each other as opposed to the hand cannot say to the foot, I have no need of you, right? Like it's a fracturing of the body as opposed to leaning into like what that actually means for us to be one in Christ.
Yeah, I mean the language thing is interesting because like it's very different from what's happening in the Catholic Church now. Because like, okay, you have the issue with the Latin Mass, and I don't know, like maybe 100 years ago in the US, you had the national parishes where like, okay, the Italians had it in Italian, this and that. But I don't know. I mean, within Orthodoxy, like I remember it was a drama when I was growing up that like the Greeks off the boat would complain when the priest would introduce more English. But
Oh yeah.
then the first and second gen were like, yeah, you gotta tone down the Greek. It's too much. We don't understand it all. And now and now that we have converts, like more of an impetus to have an English. And like I don't know, for me, I have to say, like I prefer all in Greek. And maybe
Mm,
it's because it's nostalgic for me, like reminds me of my grandparents and being in the Greek enclave. But I do think there's something about a liturgy like in its original language. Like I don't know,
yeah.
like at least with Islam, there's a reason why they pray only in Arabic because something is lost in translation. It's like no, I don't think that's a hard rule you have to hold to, but I do think it's true in principle that like yeah, something does get lost, especially with the Byzantine chant because like the melody goes along with the words that are written. It's like when I hear it in English, I'm like oh, a little off. Like I'm happy I understand it
Yeah.
fully, but it's a complicated thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and some of this is just like, English is more consonant heavy than Greek, so it sounds different when you try to sing it, right? But
Yeah.
I would maybe even say that's an example of what it means for the church to really baptize a culture over time, right?
Mm.
Because I wouldn't say that
Yeah.
you need to like even go to a Russian church and be like, no, you've got to go back to the original Greek, right? There's like it's just kind of permeated the bones of that culture, and like Slavonic works,
Yeah.
right? And like Arabic works and
Yes.
Serbian works, right? And I think maybe we just haven't reached a point yet where
Interesting.
English works because we haven't sort of we haven't like been breathing this, as Orthodox Christians here or whatever. And it might take centuries, and that's fine, right? It's going to be, I don't know. I mean, we'll see, but maybe that's the issue. It's not so much that like you can't
Yeah.
translate. It takes time for the language to assimilate to the language of liturgy.
That's an important point, yeah. Because like I remember I felt that way about English. I went to like an Anglo-Catholic Episcopal liturgy once, and it was like, high church, like very traditional. But the English in that liturgy was profoundly beautiful because it was coming from a liturgical tradition that, where English was, it's exactly what you're saying. Like over time, they created their own liturgy in English, and it was extremely poetic and profound. And like that could be possible that within, the Eastern liturgy, with the Byzantine Rite liturgy, that like that could eventually happen with English. But again,
Yeah,
it goes back to what you're saying about, these things take time. Like it's going to take a lot more than, the time it takes to develop a hot take on the internet to see
totally.
this happen in real time.
And we have one example of this, I think, in our lived culture too. Like there is one funny thing about like, the Orthodox tradition in the United States is like we're all separated by a common language because you go to a different parish and you're all trying to sing like the Paschal hymn and everybody's got a different translation. Like there's
Yeah.
one prayer that English speaking Orthodox Christians all know together, and it's the Lord's Prayer,
Yeah.
and we didn't translate it. Right? I'm pretty sure that is like the King James or the New King James or whatever it is, like that like translation that we sort of
Yeah.
use. Like we didn't do it, but it's those are words that have been said in English now for centuries.
Hmm.
Right? Like we even see it
Yeah.
sometimes. Like I
Interesting.
tease my friends, like in the Greek tradition, you say chronia pola, right? Like many years when somebody has a feast day. Like it sounds so clunky in English. Like I kind of prefer like long live somebody. Like that's how
Yeah.
people say that in English. Like they don't say many years. Like for centuries, they've been saying long live so and so. Like we have to have kind of an ear towards the way the language has actually worked. Like, there was a time when Orthodox folks and Anglican folks were sort of, talking about a potential reunion, and, theologians were looking at the Book of Common Prayer, right? And being like, there's
Mhm.
something beautiful here, right?
Yeah.
both poetically and also like theologically, because it's kind of been this thing that has been hallowed over the centuries.
Mm.
Like, I don't know, maybe we have to have a little bit more of curiosity to not kind of like recreate this language from scratch, but try
Yeah.
to graft a little bit, you
Yeah.
know?
No, it's yeah, and again, it's like it's if we're patient enough, if we're willing to work with the spirit, like yeah, I mean, I think could be possible, you know. But if we're only looking
Time will
at right
tell.
now, yeah, no. So, but okay, so I do want to kind of circle back to the kind of online nature of a lot of the discussions happening about orthodoxy. And again, a lot of what it's attracting to people to orthodoxy is content that they're finding on the internet they wouldn't have had access to before. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious as someone who has had a lot of experience online with orthodoxy. What do you see happening? Like, what's the good? What are some of the pitfalls that you're observing right now?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting and hopefully beautiful thing that people are at least being exposed to a tradition that they might not have otherwise heard about before.
Mm,
I think that the danger, though, is that the church is structured by kind of clear boundaries, canonical boundaries, right? Like
yeah.
to be a little bit sort of like simplistic about it, like historically there's a place with a bishop and then presbyters that he ordains and deacons that he ordains and like people can't it's the bishop who is rightly dividing the word of truth in his diocese, right? And people are sort of speaking to him under his authority in
Hmm.
that communion. There are no living ecumenical teachers historically, right? Like it's not somebody that gets to sort of teach the entire world. There are dead saints, right? Or saints who have passed on, I should say, right? Nobody's truly dead, who are reflected upon as ecumenical teachers, right? And kind of you can kind of say that the faith that was taught by Basil is the same faith that was taught by Athanasius, is the same faith that was taught by Maximus or whatever it is, right? Those are hierarchs and ecumenical teachers. But nobody living has that distinction. And on the internet, there are no
Hmm.
canonical boundaries, right? Like you speak into a
Yeah.
microphone and everybody across the world can hear you. Like, it doesn't matter what your local bishop thinks. It doesn't matter what your local parish thinks. And then you have the reverse thing too, that people will sometimes say, well, I have a blessing by my parish priest to do a thing on the internet. Like your parish priest does not run a diocese, let alone the entire world. Like I don't
Yeah.
think that when it comes to theological educational matters. Like, I don't think any of us have the ability to preach and teach online, which is one of the reasons that I stopped at the end of the day, because that's kind of what I was doing. And I realized, like, oh, my bad. This is not good.
Yeah.
So that's one piece, right? The tension with the canonical order. And then two is, again, the secularity of it all. That as people in this postmodern age who are, we don't live in a world where there's kind of a shared social imaginary, a shared sense of truth. It's very much a choose your own adventure. Like you get to pick at the end of the day, right? We even
Yeah.
see that around the language of conversion. Like I converted to the church because I'm the
Yeah.
main player, as opposed to I
Yeah,
was received
exactly.
into the church because it's the spirit that is the one doing the work, right? It's a very I-centered, we're monads just kind of bouncing around in this soup.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like it's that kind of framing is extremely postmodern. It's like I chose this identity out of the all the options, out of all the consumer commodities I could pick. And like the
Based on what I
irony,
wanted, my
yeah.
criteria, right? Because I'm still the judge of the church. I'm the judge of the universe at the end of the day.
But and that's the irony though of like internet subcultures that label themselves as traditional, like we're owning the libs, we're reactionary. And it's like, okay, but how is this different from someone who's like, I'm gonna create my own gender, I'm gonna create my own this or that? It's like the logic is the same, like on the surface, maybe not. And that's why again, it's like if it goes back to what you're saying in the very beginning, like if we're not creating space, being patient, listening to the spirit, we'll fool ourselves into thinking like, oh, I found the truth. I am the one who discovered the correct faith, rather than like it was given to me, like God has been leading me in this direction. And I do think like, of course, the internet can be used for good, like obviously, but the fact that it is so immediate and there's this demand for hot takes, there's this demand to like project my identity out there, it does make it harder to listen to the spirit and to be patient and to kind of like let the voice of God lead you in that mysterious way. Like the internet makes it, yeah, definitely a lot harder. Um,
Yeah.
but that's why I think what you're saying though also about like the canonical issue that like if there's no relationship with some external authority, I think it's harder to discern how you can use the internet for good because like in your head you could think like, oh yeah, I'm preaching the good news. This is great. But without some external point of reference kind of guiding you, and again, not just a priest, like someone like a bishop who's like has an actual authority. Like, yeah, I think again, in our postmodern individualistic minds, like we forget the need of no, like you do need to follow somebody other than you. Like there needs to be a dialogue with someone who's wiser than you, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'll even like lean into a little bit more that sort of like, IRL is the nature of what the church is historically, right? Like I was talking to somebody recently, well, not recently, it's been a few years now, who was talking about, online work and, hoping to be kind of an apostle to the Americas or whatever it is by doing some of this multimedia
Mm,
stuff. And like St. Paul didn't talk into a microphone,
yeah,
right? He traveled to places and he spent months, if not years, with people, like
yeah.
forming them, teaching them, ordaining people to then, like, lead the community in his absence. This is not apostolic work to just sort of like dump stuff into the ether, right? Like true apostolic work is this very much like grounded in real spaces with real people being known and being known at the same time. Um, the other piece that we have to think about too is like this is the first time, well, maybe not the first time, but at least it is a time in church history where the gospel is not being spread by saints, which is another
Mm,
thing that we have to sort of like reckon with,
yeah,
right? Like
interesting.
there's no sanctity that is needed to become influential online. If anything else, actually being kind of a jerk is helpful because the algorithm likes controversy. The
Yeah.
algorithm likes negativity, right? The algorithm likes stuff that creates outrage. Um, and as an Orthodox Christian, like my entire life, like we talk about like silence and mysticism when whatever it is, and now all we have is endless noise. There's nobody who's like going to a monastery or a cave and just like shutting the hell up and letting the spirit work on them. It's just people who are like loud. It's just constant chatter and noise. And again, that's culture shock for me because we talk about like mysticism and silence and so forth, and there's no silence to be found anywhere.
So how do you cultivate that then in your own life?
I'm bad at it. I'm bad at it. Um, I try to put boundaries around what I do online. Like I've certainly like stopped pumping stuff into the void. I also like try to stop consuming as much as I can. Like I don't consume Christian content anymore. Like I still have my favorite history podcasts and politics stuff like that, but I just try to create like my relationship with God is a thing that is mediated through the community in which I find myself, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to sort of like shift the center of my faith away from the content and back to the altar. Um, and it's hard because I don't want to be a Luddite, right? Like you said too, like the internet like can be a good thing. It's
Yeah.
certainly helpful. Like we couldn't have this conversation without it, but you know, we don't have a well-developed sense of boundaries. Like a silly thing that I'll sometimes say is like if I was, I woke up in the middle of the night and started eating chicken wings at like 2 or 3 in the morning in bed,
Yeah.
you'd be like, you have a weird relationship with food,
Yeah.
right? But if I wake up in the middle of the night and I turn to my phone and start scrolling, like, that's normal. That's what people do when they can't sleep, right? We have no sense of boundaries around the digital,
Yeah.
both in terms of like physical boundaries, like maybe there are days when we should be fasting from these devices, right? Maybe there is particular content we should not be consuming because it's not good for us. Like, okay, like watch, your favorite person talk about how the Knicks are up 3-1 in the finals, which is really fantastic news as a New Yorker, right? Like watch your sports podcast and your this and that, but like, should you be consuming theology on the internet or should you be consuming the body and blood in a parish, like in a community, right,
Yeah.
from the chalice?
Yeah. No, and I mean, I do want to just to kind of like tie things up. Now that like mainstream media is picking up on these converts, picking up on Orthodoxy, what do you think is not being said? Like, what do you think these news stories are not seeing and what's actually happening on the ground?
I mean, one thing that has jumped out to me is like they're not engaging with the church as church. I mean,
Hmm.
again, I'm not like keeping a close eye on this, but the times and whatever articles that I'm seeing, like they're reaching out to influencers, they're reaching out to whatever. Like I haven't
Mm.
seen a conversation with a bishop, for
Huh.
example,
Okay. Interesting.
right? Which again, like these are the people in the liturgy we say, like rightly dividing the word of truth, right? It is the bishop who has ultimate teaching authority in a particular diocese, and like the media which is uneducated about these things, is relating to Orthodoxy as an online phenomenon by talking to the influencers, by talking to whatever, sometimes by talking to parish priests. But again, like we are not congregationalists, right? Like the teaching authority does not inhere in the parish.
Yeah.
Um, on the Antimans, it's the name of the bishop, right? Like the presbyter serves kind of in the name of the bishop. So like the media is interacting with Orthodoxy as online Orthodoxy,
Yeah. Interesting.
which I think is part of the problem, right? Like I would much rather the Times go and like sit down and interview a bunch of bishops and ask them like because they're the ones with ultimate authority, at the end of the day.
Yeah, which I mean, also, there's something kind of deeply un-American about that, though, because again, like
That's the
as you
tension.
said, like you're not congregationalists. Like American Christianity is a certain breed of Protestantism that was very much against, hierarchy. I mean,
Hmm.
even going back to Luther, and obviously Roman Catholics had to face this a lot. I mean, there's a lot of anti-Catholic bias because, of the obedience to the Pope and the bishops, and I think you see this parallel with Orthodoxy that, the point of reference is the individual, not communion with, a hierarch. And I don't know, I have to say, like, over time, I've come to see how much, like, without that relationship with a hierarch, whether it's a bishop or someone higher, like, you really can't maintain communion because then you're left to just a mass of individuals. Like, communion
Hmm.
is really, I don't know, like, I just think, like, to the American mind, it makes no sense. But, like, when you look at experience, it's like, yeah, you need to follow somebody objective. And it's not, a blind obedience, obviously, but, like, you can't have communion without someone that you
Yeah.
follow, you know.
Yeah, I know. I think, and that's one of the things that time will tell, right? Like,
Yeah.
is the church actually going to baptize American culture, or is American culture with its sort of individualist preconceptions going to end up tweaking the church, right?
Yeah.
I think especially with the Orthodox Church in this country, like because we're in this canonically anomalous place where there is no one bishop in one city, there's multiple bishops in multiple cities, and we have these weird overlapping traditions. Like I was talking to a friend, because there is online Orthodoxy in other traditional Orthodox countries as well, and I wonder if the danger is not quite there in the same way because like if you live in Athens or whatever, you know who your bishop is. If you live in Moscow, you know who your
Yeah.
bishop is. Whereas here in the United States, like you can pick which parish you want, you can pick which
Yeah.
jurisdiction you want, right? Like I don't want to be part of the this jurisdiction because they're too whatever. I'm going to go to the authentic
Yeah.
one, which again, I, as
Yeah.
the monad navigating the world, is judging based upon my solo
Mm.
criteria, right? Like so you have that kind of weird anomalous canonical situation and then the weird anomalous canonical situation of the internet. And again, it's just like I do what I want and I can kind of like give myself the comfort of okay, but I'm doing it in the name of holy orthodoxy.
Yeah, no, I mean the fact that you have different bishops within the same locale in the US, I mean it does make it trickier. It's yeah, I don't know. But okay, just to wrap things up, I mean, as you're saying, like time is going to tell. We're not going to know just by looking at a couple tweets in an instant, like what the future of Orthodoxy is in the US. So I don't know, like what is your hope? Like, what do you hope to see? Like, what are some good signs to look out for in the future of, like seeing this kind of surge of converts coming into the Orthodox Church?
Yeah. So I have kind of a little list that I've been trying to refine over the last couple of months. Like what do I think would be kind of good, KPIs or benchmarks or whatever it is they're going to
Yeah.
show that this maybe has legs. And so there's kind of five things that I think that I would offer as what I'm trying to keep my eye on. And again, time will tell, right? But I think one, we're going to know if, people who are being received in this era, newly received Orthodox Christians, are still in the church at least a decade. That's a little bit of
Yeah.
an arbitrary line, right? But I know people who were received into the church maybe 15 years ago who have had conversations and been like, I'm the only one from my class of converts that's left. Right. So
Mm.
we do historically have a retention rate. And like being somebody who did youth and young adult ministry for a long time, like I have those questions of, we didn't do a good job of, raising faithful Orthodox Christians. What makes us think we're going to do a good job of like forming this new generation that's coming in? Right. I think it's still an open question. Time will tell if people are still healthy, engaged Orthodox Christians in a decade, that'll be a good sign. It'll be a good sign if those folks have stable connections to a particular community rather than be this nomadic, like jumping around, parish to parish, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Like you've got to be in a place where you know people and you give them the chance to know you as well,
Mhm.
right? To be an authentic person, a transparent person, as opposed to somebody hiding. The parish, right? That local Eucharistic community has to be the source of formation, not your favorite influencer.
Mhm.
And I have a lot of buddies of mine from seminary, right? When they take on new inquirers, one of the first things that they say is like, I'm glad the internet brought you here. Like, turn off your phone. You start listening to us here.
Mhm.
And that's a challenge for
Yeah.
people, right? Because they want to think, whoever on the internet said this thing. So that's three. I think the number of vocations has to grow,
Mhm.
like seminary vocations, monastic vocations. I would even add like with focus and the philanthropic ministries that we're creating, right? People who are like doing the thing, not just Sunday Christians, right? Not just like online consumers, but people who are like, I'm going to go to seminary and serve the church in an ordained capacity. I'm going to go to a monastery and commit myself to prayer. I'm going to start leading a local service ministry, right? Rise in vocations.
Mhm.
And then the number of parishes has to grow. Like there's a part of me that's like, are some of these parishes that are kind of bursting at the seams and they're investing in new real estate, like are these new halls going to be empty in 10 or 15 or 20 years, right? In the same way that other parishes, which were bursting at the seams when folks were, immigrating from the old country, like, the Orthodox Church is still closing parishes at the same time that we're starting new ones, right? So time will tell in terms of, do we actually have more Eucharistic communities that are forming people in a healthy sort of way?
Yeah. So I think yeah, like one of the main things that is standing out to me from this conversation is the need to yeah, like cultivate that patience and that attention to the bigger picture, the long game. Which yeah, like if the for those of us who are overly online, like we really have to work actively to cultivate it. And not just that, I mean like to pray for the grace to do that. Because
Yeah.
if not, if we're just looking for the hot takes and what's happening in the moment, like we're gonna lose a lot. We might lose our souls. So I don't know. I think that's something we can all ask
Yeah.
for and pray for, you know.
I'll pass on a word from a friend of mine who's a presbyter, and he was telling me recently that, when he hears confessions, he hears a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, the
Mm,
loneliness, the disconnection, the whatever. He's been telling people, especially recently, I want you to go, and he's in a city where there's a local focus center. He's like, I want you to go and volunteer with Focus. Like, I want you to go
mm,
and cook a meal and sit down with somebody and talk to them, right? I want you to get out of your own head. I want you to get out of those internet spaces. I want you
yeah.
to like be the living presence of Christ in the world. And that's why I think maybe it's providential that this ministry is building steam at the same time that this other stuff is happening, because I just think we need ministry. We need like the living manifestation of Christ's love in the community, not just chatter, right? Like we need people to just be people together in the Lord's name.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I really do hope that focus can grow and that, yeah, more people can have access to these kinds of opportunities in the Orthodox Church. So, I mean, obviously we're going to plug focus, but are there any other things that you want to plug or mention to listeners?
No, that's the big thing. Uh, Pray for the ministry, volunteer if you can, give if you can. I mean, it's just I would love to see this be kind of like a cultural landmark, right? I mean, everybody knows what Catholic charities are, everybody knows what Lutheran social services are. Like, I
Mhm.
feel like people should, if we're really going to be grown-up Christians in this country, people should know
Yeah,
what the Fellowship of Orthodox Christians United to Serve is.
for sure. So we'll link to that in the description. But Stephen, thank you so much for coming on.
Stephen, this was a joy, a lot of fun. Thank you.